She was one of the country's best investigative journalists. One investigation made her a hero, while another nearly destroyed a man who stayed silent, not because he was guilty, but because he was protecting innocent lives. This story will remind you how dangerous it is to judge someone by the headlines, and how easily the truth can be turned into a weapon against an innocent person. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell us in the comments. Do you think first impressions can really be trusted? Or is there always another side to every story? The newsroom had not yet settled into its usual morning rhythm when Evelyn Carter walked through the glass doors, carrying nothing but a leather satchel, a notebook, and the quiet confidence of someone who had already survived battles most reporters only dreamed about. People looked up, not because she demanded attention, but because she had earned it. 3 months earlier, she had dismantled a corruption network that reached from city contractors to elected officials. Resignations followed. Criminal investigations followed. Awards followed. She accepted none of the praise with much enthusiasm. Victory never felt complete. Not after what had happened to her father. His face still surfaced in moments like these, not as a memory wrapped in nostalgia, but as unfinished business. Years ago, he had refused to approve fraudulent contracts. The people responsible walked away wealthier. He walked away unemployed, publicly disgraced, and slowly destroyed by a system that rewarded silence and punished integrity. Evelyn had watched it happen. She had learned something dangerous from it. Corruption rarely looked like corruption. It wore expensive watches, polished smiles, charitable foundations, and carefully rehearsed interviews. Ever since then, journalism had stopped being a profession. It had become a form of prosecution. The editor-in-chief stepped out of his office carrying a thick black folder. "This one is yours." She opened it. The first photograph showed a man standing in front of a construction project. Logan Brooks, 31, founder of Brooks Capital, investor. One of the fastest rising businessmen in the country, publicly respected, privately feared, if rumors were to be believed. "There have been whispers for years," the editor said. "Nothing anyone could ever prove. If half of it is true, this becomes the investigation of the decade." Evelyn closed the folder. "I'll bring you proof." "I don't need assumptions," he replied. "You'll get facts." She believed that, completely. The call arrived 2 days later from a disposable number. The voice on the other end never introduced itself. "I have everything." No names, no explanations, only a meeting place, a parking garage beneath an abandoned shopping center. The envelope waiting inside contained far more than she expected. Corporate contracts, wire transfers, internal correspondence, financial statements, shareholder agreements. She spent the next 14 hours reading every page. A pattern slowly emerged. A manufacturing company employing nearly 700 workers had collapsed shortly after Brooks Capital acquired controlling shares. Within weeks, the factory closed. Families lost their income. The town surrounding it began dying almost immediately. Then came the transfers. Millions of dollars moved through holding companies before disappearing overseas. Every document pointed toward Logan Brooks. Every signature appeared authentic. Every timeline fit perfectly, too perfectly. But confirmation bias has a quiet voice. It rarely announces itself. It simply convinces intelligent people that they have stopped needing alternative explanations. By sunrise, Evelyn no longer saw a businessman. She saw another polished predator hiding behind boardrooms and investment portfolios. Another man who had learned that destroying lives looked perfectly legal if enough paperwork accompanied it. She leaned back in her chair. "So that's who you really are." For the first time since opening the file, she smiled. Not because she enjoyed exposing people, because she believed justice had finally found another address. 3 days later, she stood outside Brooks Capital headquarters. The cameras from competing outlets had not arrived yet. She wanted his first statement before the story exploded. Employees walked in and out. Black SUVs arrived. Executives disappeared behind tinted glass. Logan Brooks appeared almost unnoticed. No bodyguards, no security detail surrounding him, no designer suit, no luxury accessories, just dark trousers and a fitted blue t-shirt that looked like it had come from any ordinary clothing store. For a brief second, the simplicity irritated her more than wealth ever could. It looked calculated, an image designed to soften public perception. She stepped directly into his path. "Mr. Brooks." He stopped. His expression remained calm, not cold, not defensive, simply attentive. "I'm Evelyn Carter. I know who you are. I'm preparing an investigation into your acquisition of Halbrook Manufacturing. I assumed someone eventually would. You bankrupted 700 families. No. You profited while an entire town collapsed. I understand why it looks that way. So you admit it. I admitted no such thing." She waited for irritation, for legal threats, for the practiced arrogance she had encountered so many times before. Instead, he looked directly into her eyes with a level of composure that felt almost unsettling. Then he said quietly, "If you've already reached your verdict, nothing I say will change it." Silence settled between them. She wanted to answer immediately. Instead, she found herself strangely irritated by the absence of conflict. He wasn't fighting. He wasn't pleading. He wasn't manipulating through charm. He simply stepped around her. "No comment?" she called after him. He paused without turning around. "Not today." Then he walked into the building. No dramatic exit. No performance. Just a man carrying himself as though public hatred had become part of his daily schedule. Evelyn stood motionless for several seconds. Something about the encounter unsettled her, not because she doubted the evidence, because his self-control refused to fit the psychological profile she had already built in her mind. She dismissed the thought almost immediately. Sociopaths often possessed remarkable emotional regulation. That explanation felt easier, cleaner, safer. By the time she reached her apartment, evening had covered the city. She threw the folder across the kitchen table. His words echoed louder than they should have. "If you've already reached your verdict." She interpreted them as calculated arrogance, the confidence of a man who believed money had protected him for too long, the confidence of someone accustomed to escaping consequences. Good. That only made her more determined. She opened her laptop. The blinking cursor waited. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, sentence after sentence began dismantling Logan Brooks in front of an audience that had not yet read a single word. Every paragraph sharpened the accusation. Every document strengthened the narrative. Every conclusion felt undeniable. She never noticed the one dangerous thing missing from the entire article: doubt. The article detonated exactly the way Evelyn Carter had predicted, except the explosion refused to stop. Within the first hour, every major news outlet had republished fragments of her investigation. Television anchors spoke with carefully measured outrage. Political commentators competed to sound more morally uncompromising than one another. Financial analysts declared Logan Brooks the embodiment of corporate greed before markets had even opened. The internet did what it always did. It simplified. Nuance disappeared beneath certainty. Every headline became more ruthless than the last. The billionaire who destroyed hundreds of families. The investor who built his fortune on human misery. Brooks Capital under federal pressure. The algorithms rewarded outrage. Every repost amplified another. Opinion disguised itself as fact, while fact slowly adapted itself to public emotion. Within 48 hours, the story no longer belonged to Evelyn. It belonged to the machine. Investors began liquidating their positions. Business partners suspended negotiations. Banks quietly reviewed credit agreements. Several charitable organizations publicly distanced themselves from Brooks Capital. The company's stock entered freefall. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. Anonymous insiders leaked that several members were demanding Logan's immediate resignation in order to protect shareholder confidence. His face was suddenly everywhere. television, podcasts, newspapers, billboards promoting nightly debate shows. He had become less of a man and more of a symbol, a convenient villain onto whom an entire society could project its accumulated anger toward wealth, privilege, and unchecked power. Meanwhile, Evelyn became something else, the reporter who had exposed the untouchable. Colleagues applauded her every time she entered the newsroom. Her editor shook her hand longer than usual. "You've just changed your career." The Journalism Association announced her investigation as the leading candidate for its annual Investigative Reporting Award. Interview requests flooded her inbox. Universities invited her to speak. People she had never met called her courageous. She smiled politely, thanked everyone, accepted every handshake. Yet each congratulation landed somewhere outside of her. The satisfaction she had expected never arrived. Instead, an unfamiliar emptiness quietly settled inside her. Not guilt, not yet. Just silence where victory should have been. It irritated her. She explained it away as exhaustion. Nothing more, nothing less. 3 days later, the courthouse steps looked less like the entrance to a legal institution and more like a public execution. Satellite trucks lined the street. Camera crews fought for better angles. Reporters rehearsed questions they already knew would never receive answers. Security barriers barely contained the crowd. Some people carried homemade signs. Others shouted accusations before the hearing had even concluded. Public opinion had already delivered its verdict. The courtroom merely existed to formalize it. Evelyn stood among dozens of journalists, microphone lowered, notebook closed. She wasn't there to ask another question. She wanted to observe him, to understand whether the confident man outside Brooks Capital had finally cracked. The courthouse doors opened. Logan Brooks emerged. No entourage, no legal team shielding him from cameras, no dramatic attempt to escape. He walked down the stone steps at an unhurried pace, dressed as simply as ever. Dark trousers, a fitted blue t-shirt beneath a lightweight jacket. His shoulders remained straight, despite the chaos surrounding him. Questions exploded from every direction. Did you destroy those jobs? When are you stepping down? Do you deny stealing from investors? How many lives have you ruined? One reporter shouted, "People hate you, Mr. Brooks. How does that feel?" Someone in the crowd yelled louder, "Murderer!" Another voice followed, "Thief!" Phones stretched toward his face like weapons searching for the perfect reaction. One moment of anger, one insult, one emotional mistake. That was all they wanted. Instead, Logan stopped, not because anyone forced him to, because he chose to. The crowd slowly quieted. He looked across dozens of cameras with remarkable calm. His voice remained steady, almost gentle. "If society has decided that I'm guilty," he said, "then perhaps that's what it needs right now." The words landed with unexpected weight. No denial, no outrage, no rehearsed legal statement, no appeal for sympathy, only acceptance. A strange, unsettling acceptance. He gave a small nod, then continued walking. No one followed immediately. For several seconds, even professional reporters seemed uncertain how to react. There was nothing to argue with, nothing sensational to isolate into a headline, only silence. By the time the shouting resumed, Logan had already disappeared into a waiting car. The crowd had been left with something it could neither celebrate nor destroy. Evelyn remained standing on the courthouse steps long after everyone else returned to work. His sentence replayed inside her mind with irritating persistence. If society has decided that I'm guilty, it should have sounded manipulative, calculated, strategic. Instead, it sounded resigned. That disturbed her more than any public relations performance could have. During her career, she had interviewed corrupt politicians, fraudulent executives, organized crime witnesses, and convicted embezzlers. The guilty almost always behaved the same way. They denied, deflected, attacked, blamed the media, questioned motives, threatened lawsuits, manipulated public opinion. Logan Brooks had done none of it. He accepted humiliation with a composure that refused to fit the psychological profile she had constructed. The discrepancy lodged itself inside her mind like a splinter, small, almost invisible, impossible to ignore. For the first time since publishing the investigation, certainty developed its first fracture. She hated that feeling. Doubt was dangerous, especially for someone whose reputation depended on being right. Sleep abandoned her completely that night. At 2 a.m, she gave up pretending otherwise. The apartment remained dark except for the desk lamp illuminating stacks of contracts spread across the dining table. She told herself she was simply preparing for inevitable legal challenges. Nothing more. She made fresh coffee, opened the files again, read every page from the beginning, not searching for innocence, searching for reinforcement, for proof that her instincts had been correct. Hours passed. She enlarged digital scans, compared dates, cross-checked transaction numbers. Nothing. Then something almost microscopic caught her attention. A signature. Harold Whitmore, Chief Financial Officer. She frowned. The final letter curved slightly upward. She opened another contract signed only 3 weeks earlier. The same name, the same pen, the same handwriting. Except this time the final stroke curved downward. Barely. Almost imperceptibly. Most people would never notice. She continued comparing signatures, one after another. A pattern slowly emerged. Some signatures carried natural variation, others repeated with impossible precision, as though copied from the same template. Her pulse slowed instead of accelerating. Experienced investigators knew this feeling, not excitement, recognition. The quiet moment when certainty begins dissolving under evidence. She reached for a magnifying glass, examined pressure marks, ink flow, letter spacing. The differences were real, tiny, but undeniably real. Her breathing became shallow. One thought surfaced before every other. What if someone wanted me to find these documents? The room suddenly felt much colder. Outside, dawn was still hours away. Inside, Evelyn stared at the contracts that had built her greatest professional triumph. For the first time, they no longer looked like proof. They looked like bait. Evelyn Carter stopped telling people what she was working on, not because she had solved the mystery, because she no longer trusted it. The tiny inconsistency in the signatures had become an obsession. Every hour she spent examining the contracts uncovered another question, and every answer seemed to erase the certainty she had built her career upon. She couldn't involve the newsroom. Not yet. If she was wrong, she would destroy her own credibility. If she was right, she had already destroyed someone else's. For the first time since becoming an investigative journalist, she understood that evidence could be engineered just as carefully as lies. That realization was enough to make her question every instinct she had ever relied on. It took 4 days to locate Daniel Mercer, former chief financial officer of Halbrook Manufacturing, officially retired, unofficially invisible. He lived alone in a weathered house overlooking a quiet lake, nearly 2 hours outside the city. No expensive cars, no security cameras, no signs of a man who had once managed hundreds of millions of dollars. When he opened the door, he recognized Evelyn immediately. I wondered how long it would take. You know why I'm here. I do. He didn't invite her inside immediately. Instead, he looked past her toward the empty road, as though making certain no one had followed. Only then did he step aside. His kitchen smelled of old coffee and unfinished regrets. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Finally, Evelyn placed copies of the contracts on the table. I need you to tell me if these signatures are genuine. Daniel studied them silently. Then he gave a tired smile that carried no satisfaction. They're good. Good? Good forgeries. Her stomach tightened. I knew Harold Whitmore. He tapped one of the signatures. He never signed his last name like this. Evelyn leaned forward. Why didn't you say anything? Because nobody wanted the truth. You could have gone to the press. I tried. His voice remained flat. No one buys corrections after they've already bought outrage. Silence settled between them. Then Daniel looked directly at her. You weren't chosen because you were careless. She frowned. You were chosen because you're respected. He paused. They needed someone the public would believe. Every word landed harder than the previous one. You weren't investigating a scandal. He continued quietly. You were part of it. The room suddenly felt smaller. She remembered every congratulation, every interview, every award nomination, every headline praising her courage. Not one of them had belonged to her. Someone else had written the script. She had simply delivered the performance. She sent Logan Brooks a message that evening. One sentence. I need to speak with you. No cameras, no lawyers, no recording devices. Just the truth. His reply arrived 12 minutes later. Tomorrow, 10 p.m., Brooks Capital, top floor, nothing else. The conference room overlooked the sleeping city. Glass walls reflected hundreds of distant lights. The building itself had almost emptied. The silence inside felt deliberate. When Evelyn entered, Logan was already there. No jacket, no tie, just the same fitted blue t-shirt she remembered from their first meeting. A laptop sat closed beside him. Several folders rested neatly on the table. He stood as she approached. Neither offered a handshake. Neither apologized. Trust had not earned a place in the room. Not yet. For several seconds, they simply looked at one another. It wasn't hostility. It was assessment. Two people trying to determine whether the person standing across from them still deserved honesty. Finally, Evelyn broke the silence. I found the forged signatures. I assumed you eventually would. You knew? I suspected. You never tried to stop me. Logan's expression barely changed. Would you have believed me? She opened her mouth, stopped. No, she wouldn't have. The realization irritated her more than his answer. She sat down. So explain everything. He remained standing for a moment before opening one of the folders. I will. He slid several documents toward her. Read the dates first. She compared them. The transfer that appeared to prove financial fraud had occurred 3 weeks after the company had already entered government supervision. Another file showed internal communications she had never seen, a confidential memorandum, court authorization, financial audits. She looked up. These weren't public. They couldn't be. Why? Because the investigation wasn't public. He opened another folder. Inside were financial statements marked with federal confidentiality notices. The factory wasn't simply failing. He spoke without theatrical pauses, without trying to impress her. It had become a laundering channel for an international criminal network. She stared at him. The acquisition wasn't about making money. No. It was containment. Yes. She continued reading. Every page dismantled another assumption she had built. Every figure matched official audit trails. Every timeline closed another contradiction. Nothing felt improvised. Nothing felt manipulated. Only painfully consistent. She lowered the documents. You let the world believe you destroyed those people. I let them believe what was necessary. You lost billions. I know. You became the most hated businessman in the country. I noticed. There was no bitterness in his voice, only fatigue, the kind that accumulates over years rather than weeks. Evelyn studied him carefully. The media had painted him as ruthless, power-hungry, emotionless. The man sitting across from her looked nothing like that caricature. He looked exhausted, not by criticism, by responsibility. For the first time, she stopped interviewing him. She started listening. An unexpected shift occurred between them. The hostility that had fueled every previous encounter slowly dissolved into something far more dangerous. Respect. Not agreement. Not forgiveness. Respect. She realized something unsettling. Logan never interrupted her. He never spoke louder to win a point. He never tried to dominate the conversation. His confidence came from evidence, not performance. It challenged her in ways anger never could. She noticed how carefully he chose every word. He noticed that she refused to accept easy explanations. Neither admired weakness. Both respected discipline. The conversation became less like an interrogation and more like two experienced chess players abandoning tricks because neither needed them anymore. For the first time in weeks, Evelyn forgot she was speaking to the man she had publicly destroyed. She was simply speaking to someone whose mind moved with the same relentless precision as her own. The realization unsettled her more than attraction ever could. This wasn't infatuation. It was recognition. The rare, uncomfortable recognition that another person could challenge every certainty you carried without raising their voice. Nearly 3 hours passed before Evelyn finally stood. The city outside had fallen completely silent. She gathered the folders slowly. Her hands felt heavier than when she had arrived. So, everything. She struggled to finish the sentence. Everything I published was built on real documents, he answered calmly. Just not real conclusions. The distinction cut deeper than any accusation. She looked down. I destroyed your life. For the first time that evening, Logan looked away from the papers and directly at her. There was disappointment in his eyes, but no hatred. No, he said quietly. The people who created those documents did that. She swallowed. I helped them. You did. Neither of them softened the truth. Neither of them searched for comforting words. Some damage deserved to remain painful. Evelyn picked up her coat. She reached the door. Her hand rested on the handle. Behind her, Logan spoke one final sentence. You were the only one who came to ask me in person. She closed her eyes. The words struck harder than anger ever could. Not because they accused her, because they didn't. In a world that had judged him through headlines, outrage, and carefully manufactured certainty, she had become the first person willing to risk discovering she had been wrong. When she finally walked out into the empty hallway, she realized something had changed forever. She had entered the building searching for evidence. She left carrying something infinitely heavier, the truth, and the unbearable responsibility that came with knowing it. Morning arrived without bringing clarity. It only brought evidence. Evelyn Carter spent the next several days moving through a maze of federal records, sealed court filings that had recently been unsealed, financial audits, and confidential interviews that no one had been willing to give before. The deeper she dug, the more unbearable the truth became. Halbrook Manufacturing had never been just another struggling factory. It had been a carefully constructed facade. Behind legitimate payrolls and production reports, operated one of the largest international money laundering networks federal investigators had encountered in years. The factory's shipping routes had transported more than machinery. Its accounting department had hidden millions in criminal proceeds. Its executives had financed witness intimidation, bribery, and violent coercion. People had disappeared. Families had received anonymous threats. 2 key witnesses had spent years under federal protection. Every page she read dismantled another piece of the story she had once believed. Then she reached the final classified report. She read it twice, then a third time. Logan Brooks had never purchased the company to destroy it. Federal investigators had approached him long before the acquisition. The operation required someone capable of entering the organization without raising suspicion. Someone financially powerful enough to absorb enormous losses. Someone willing to become the public face of decisions that could never be explained. For years he had carried out that role. Every accusation had been anticipated. Every newspaper headline had been considered an acceptable price. Every insult had protected the operation. The day the factory officially collapsed, dozens of arrests became possible. Accounts were frozen. Evidence was secured. Witnesses survived. Had the operation been exposed even weeks earlier, several protected witnesses would almost certainly have been killed. Logan had known that from the beginning. He had signed the agreements anyway. The report ended with one sentence that Evelyn could not stop reading. Subject accepted permanent reputational damage as an operational necessity. Permanent, not temporary, not until public opinion changed. Permanent. She leaned back in her chair. Suddenly everything she had seen over the past weeks made sense. His silence, his composure, his refusal to defend himself. He had never been protecting his reputation. He had been protecting people whose names even now remained redacted. She closed the file. For the first time in years, she couldn't look at herself with the confidence that had always defined her. The newsroom celebrated while she quietly unraveled. Her investigation still hung framed on the conference room wall. People continued congratulating her. Young reporters called her an inspiration. Every compliment now felt almost cruel. She replayed every interview she had given, every confident statement, every headline she had accepted without protest. She had believed she was exposing corruption. Instead, she had unknowingly become the final instrument in someone else's manipulation, not because she lacked intelligence, because certainty had replaced curiosity, because once she believed she had found the villain, she had stopped asking whether someone else might be directing the story. The realization hollowed her from the inside. Professional shame was painful. Moral shame was something entirely different. It stayed quiet and refused to leave. Late that evening, she found herself standing outside Logan Brooks's house. It surprised her, not because it was beautiful, because it wasn't. The home overlooked a quiet stretch of water outside the city. Modern, simple, warm lights behind large windows, no gates, no visible security, no symbols of enormous wealth, only stillness. She stood at the door for nearly a full minute before knocking. Logan opened it himself. He looked tired, more tired than she had ever seen him. Neither of them spoke immediately. He simply stepped aside. "You came. I wasn't sure I deserved to. You came anyway." She entered. The house was quiet enough that the sound of rain against the windows filled every pause between their words. A kettle whistled softly in the kitchen. Books covered the shelves. Family photographs were noticeably absent. There was surprisingly little evidence that someone lived there at all, as though the house had become a place to recover rather than belong. They sat across from one another without touching the tea he had prepared. For several moments, Evelyn searched for words worthy of what she had done. None existed. Finally, she spoke. "I know everything." Logan remained silent. "I read the federal reports." Still nothing. "The witnesses." A slight nod. "The operation." Another. She looked down at her hands. They were trembling. "I spent years believing that the worst mistake a journalist could make was failing to publish the truth." Her voice began to break. "I never imagined it could be publishing the wrong truth." The sentence collapsed under its own weight. Tears gathered before she could stop them. Not dramatic tears, not theatrical grief, the quiet kind born from genuine remorse. She covered her face for a moment. "I'm sorry." Silence. "I destroyed your name." Silence again. "I helped the people you were trying to stop." The words barely escaped her. "I am so unbelievably sorry." The room remained still. Logan looked at her for a long time before answering. There was no triumph in his expression, no satisfaction, no desire to make her suffer as he had, only understanding. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the truth arrives too late." He paused. "But it's still better than if it never arrived at all." She looked at him through blurred eyes. "You don't hate me?" "I tried." A faint, tired smile appeared for the first time. "It takes too much energy." She almost laughed through the tears. Almost. Instead, she whispered, "I don't know how to forgive myself." "You don't have to do it tonight." The simplicity of his answer shattered the last wall she had been holding together. Without thinking, she stood. So did he. For a moment, neither moved. Months of anger, suspicion, regret, respect. Everything existed in the silence between them. Then Evelyn closed the distance, not out of desperation, not seeking absolution, simply because she no longer wanted either of them to carry the weight alone. She wrapped her arms around him, carefully, almost uncertainly. He remained still for a heartbeat. Then, with the same quiet certainty that defined everything he did, he embraced her in return. No words followed. None were necessary. Outside, rain continued falling against the windows. Inside, two people who had spent years fighting different versions of the same loneliness finally allowed themselves to stop pretending they were unbreakable. Evelyn rested her forehead against his shoulder, listening to the slow rhythm of his breathing. For the first time in weeks, neither of them was defending anything. Not a reputation, not an investigation, not a carefully constructed image, only each other. When she finally looked up, their eyes met without accusation, without fear. The distance that had once been filled with mistrust had become something entirely different. A quiet promise, not of perfection, not of forgetting, but of walking through whatever came next together. Neither of them spoke about love. They were too honest for words that easy. What existed between them had been built from something far stronger: truth, forgiveness, and the rare comfort of finding another soul who understood exactly how heavy responsibility could become. For the first time in a very long while, neither of them felt alone. The first article had spread through the country like wildfire. The second moved like a courtroom transcript, slower, heavier, harder to accept. Evelyn Carter spent 3 weeks rebuilding the investigation from the ground up, this time refusing to publish a single sentence she could not verify from multiple independent sources. Every document was authenticated, every timeline cross-checked, every interview recorded, reviewed, and challenged. There would be no shortcuts, no assumptions disguised as certainty. When the story was finally released, it did not ask for forgiveness. It demanded accountability. The names behind the forged contracts were no longer hidden. The financial consultants who had fabricated evidence, the executives who had orchestrated the deception, the public relations firm that quietly amplified outrage while manipulating journalists behind the scenes, the criminal organization that had understood something terrifying about modern society. People no longer needed proof. They only needed a convincing narrative delivered at the right moment. Federal arrests followed within days. Several executives disappeared into custody before sunrise. Corporate records were seized. Encrypted servers were recovered. The operation that had nearly buried the truth beneath manufactured outrage finally collapsed under its own weight. This time, Evelyn signed her name beneath the article with trembling hands, not because she feared the consequences, because she finally understood the weight of every word she published. The truth returned. Reputation did not. Public apologies appeared on television. News anchors corrected previous reports. Editorial boards quietly updated old headlines. But outrage had already settled into memory. Some people accepted the new evidence. Many did not. Social media refused complexity. Posts still circulated calling Logan Brooks a criminal. Old photographs continued appearing without context. People who had never read either investigation repeated opinions they had borrowed months earlier. Hatred had become habit, and habits are rarely persuaded by facts. Logan's company survived. Barely. Several investors returned. Many never would. Business partnerships remained broken. Old friendships had vanished for good. Trust, once shattered, refused to grow back at the speed it had been destroyed. Evelyn discovered that redemption carried its own punishment. The same colleagues who had celebrated her first investigation now questioned her motives. Some whispered that she had been intimidated. Others claimed she had accepted money. One television commentator dismissed her entire career in a single sentence. Another journalist who got too close to her subject. The accusations spread faster than her evidence ever could. She understood the irony immediately. She had become another victim of the same machinery she once believed she controlled. One evening, she returned home exhausted after another hostile interview. Logan was sitting on the balcony overlooking the water, reading through investment reports with a mug of coffee beside him. He looked up. "Tough day?" She nodded. "They don't believe me." He closed the folder. "I know. They think I betrayed journalism." "No." He stood and walked toward her. "They think certainty is stronger than humility." She smiled faintly. "I used to think that too." So did most of us. Neither tried to fix the other's pain. They had learned that some burdens weren't solved by speeches, only by presence. Their relationship never announced itself. There were no dramatic declarations, no carefully staged photographs, no interviews discussing love after scandal. Life simply continued. Sometimes she worked late while he quietly brought dinner to her office. Sometimes he returned home carrying another impossible decision from work, and she listened without trying to solve it. On difficult mornings, they drank coffee in comfortable silence. On difficult evenings, they walked along the lake without discussing headlines, investigations, or public opinion. Neither expected perfection. Neither demanded explanations where trust already existed. They had discovered something both of them had lacked for years, a place where performance was unnecessary. She no longer admired his strength because he appeared invincible. She admired it because she had seen how much it had cost him. He no longer respected her because she always found the truth. He respected her because she had possessed the courage to admit when she had been wrong. For two people who had built their lives around certainty, that became the strongest foundation either had ever known. Several months later, the courthouse steps filled once again. This time, the cameras had gathered for a different reason. Federal prosecutors officially announced the convictions connected to the criminal network. Journalists crowded around the podium. Microphones stretched toward the speakers. Flashes illuminated the afternoon. When Evelyn approached the lectern, the noise gradually faded. She looked across the sea of faces, some friendly, some skeptical, some still openly hostile. She recognized many of them. She had once stood exactly where they were standing now, certain, confident, completely convinced she already knew the truth. She took a slow breath, then spoke. "The most dangerous lie," she paused, "isn't the one spoken by a criminal." The crowd became perfectly still. "The most dangerous lie is the one everyone is willing to believe without asking another question." Silence followed, not the uncomfortable silence of confusion, the heavier kind, the kind that forces people to confront themselves instead of the person speaking. She continued, "I believed documents before I understood people. I believed certainty before I respected doubt. And in doing so, I nearly helped destroy an innocent man." Her voice never shook. "Journalism is not about proving we're right. It's about having the courage to discover when we aren't." When she stepped away from the microphone, there was no applause, only reflection. It was enough. The courthouse doors opened behind them. Logan waited several steps away, not beside the cameras, not seeking attention, simply waiting. She walked toward him. Neither reached for the other's hand. Neither owed the crowd a demonstration of affection. Some things lost their meaning the moment they became performances. Without speaking, they began walking down the courthouse steps together, side by side, at the same pace, toward the same horizon. The cameras continued clicking behind them. Neither turned around. For the first time in a long while, neither of them cared who was watching, because they had already learned the difference between being seen and being understood. Narrator. A reputation can be destroyed by a single headline. Sometimes an entire lifetime isn't enough to restore it. We live in a world where information travels faster than truth, where outrage spreads more easily than understanding, and where certainty is often rewarded more than honesty. Before judging someone, ask one more question. Look one step deeper. Because behind every headline is a human life, and sometimes the greatest act of justice is not exposing a lie, but refusing to believe one until you've searched for the whole truth.